to spend the rest of the night in bed, enjoying each other. Carson Boyette Granger was everything he'd ever wanted. More importantly, she was every single thing he needed, even when it looked like he was destined to serve 30 years in prison. The last thing he thought he'd find while locked up behind bars was the love of a lifetime. A woman who, for 5 years, had shown him that if you truly believed, dreams could come true. His wife had looked exquisite tonight. The dress she'd worn had been absolutely perfect. It had been red, his favorite color, and the sleek design had skated along all her seductive curves. The side split that ran up her leg had exposed an appealing thigh. He'd noted the heads of several men turn to stare when they'd entered the restaurant. He'd barely been able to keep his own eyes off her during dinner, and scarcely recalled what had been on his plate. However, he had remembered every detail of what happened once they came back home. He had leaned against the closed bedroom door and watched her strip. His heart had pounded with every stitch she'd removed, letting each piece of clothing pool at her feet. Her dress, garter, bra, panties. His heart was pounding now at the memory. He had met Carson about 6 years ago, when the family of one of the young inmates he mentored had hired her to represent their son when they pushed for a retrial. The first time he'd seen her, he had been totally and completely captivated. He'd been convinced then, and was still convinced now, that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever met. The attraction between him and Carson had been instantaneous, although he'd fought it like hell. First off, she was nearly 10 years his junior, and from what he'd heard about her, she was a top-notch attorney who frequented the prison to meet with the young inmates, pro bono. He, on the other hand, a man accused of murdering his wife, had nothing to offer her. But Carson hadn't cared, once they had been honest about their feelings. When he'd gotten dissatisfied with the way his own attorney was handling his business, he had replaced the man with Carson. It was a decision he'd never regretted. Realizing he hadn't answered, he spoke up. "Yes, sweetheart? You okay?" A smile touched his lips. Carson always made him her major concern, her main priority. That was something his first wife, Sylvia, never did. "I'm fine, just thinking." "At 3 in the morning?" He chuckled. "Yes, at 3 in the morning. I guess some habits are hard to break." While in prison, he hadn't been able to sleep until he knew all the young men on his floor, most of whom he'd mentored and who'd come to be known as Shep's boys, had been accounted for and were in their cells asleep. It was only then that he could close his eyes and rest. "Then we will think together," she said, easing out of the bed. Sheppard drew in a deep, calming breath, trying to keep his libido in check, while watching her cross the room to him. The moonlight shining through the window cast a glow on her naked body. Mesmerized, he believed she was the most desirable woman to walk the face of the earth, and he fought against the turbulent sensations fueled by intense desire from overtaking him again that night. He was satisfied in believing, most of the time, that this continued influx of sexual need for her was due to the fact they were still making up for lost time. For so long, the very idea of making love to her was a dream, and never a reality. For 5 years, they'd done everything but consummate their relationship, and it hadn't been easy. Just looking at her made the air shimmer, and could cause a tightening low in his gut. When he opened his arms, she quickened her steps and walked right into them. He tightened his hold on her, and at that moment, he needed her, here in his arms. So many times while in prison, she'd been his lifeline, his calm after the storm. He didn't know of a more loving, dedicated, and loyal individual. Carson was someone who loved deeply. She wasn't quick